Welcome back to the class. And we are in the week in which we are looking into the influence of Dalit studies on Indian sociology. And in the previous classes, we had a look at Dalit studies in general by looking into the arguments of or contributions of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And then in the last class, we had a two sessions on an introductory essay written by Paramjit Judge, which kind of provided a very broad overview of the Dalit studies, the kind of epistemological and ideological promises and methodological promises that it provides, and a series of socio-historical reasons and contexts that led to the emergence of Dalit studies as a very important development in the Indian intellectual scenario. So we have two more sessions to go for this week. And I thought of looking into a very interesting set of readings, a very interesting set of articles written by Gopal Guru and Sharmila Rege on the question of Dalit women's issues. Okay, and these debates, of course, when you move to these discussions, we know that the kind of watertight compartmentalization is almost impossible. It's very difficult to label many of these readings as specifically only on Dalit or only on women or only on something else, because many of these arguments and articles and scholarly interventions are kind of more multidisciplinary. They cut across the disciplinary boundaries, they cut across the theoretical boundaries. So these articles they cut across the boundaries of Dalit studies into women's studies, into standpoint theories, into intersectional studies. So very interesting set of theoretical arguments are presented in these articles. So I am going to take up two essays for these two classes, continued sessions. One is an essay titled "Dalit Women Talk Differently" written by Gopal Guru. It's a very short essay, but of course it provoked a lot of discussions, and later even inspired Sharmila Rege to write an essay, a more detailed essay in EPW, which we are going to discuss in the next session. So these two are they talk about the uniqueness of a Dalit women's perspective. What does that it has to offer to sociology in general and to social theory in sociology in particular and social theory more generally. And this falls under kind of very important interventions in the last 2-3 decades that has happened to Indian sociology by drawing on a very important theoretical turn, what is called as the standpoint theory, okay, made popular by a very important scholar Sandra Hardings, in which she wrote a book called as this title, the science question in feminism, in the mid 1980s, and that kind of opened up very important theoretical debates about the social positionality of a scholar and the questions of objectivity, strong objectivity, weak objectivity, and a host of other interesting debates. So I'm not going deeper into that particular debate as such, but try to understand how that debate influenced Indian sociology in general and Indian feminism, and maybe in more particular, and Dalit studies more in particular, and how that kind of invigorated a lot of interesting discussions and debates in the Indian sociological field. Okay, so this essay is a part of that. Dalit women talk differently because, as the very title demonstrates, Gopal Guru is talking about how Dalit women, because of their positionality as Dalit and also as women, how their voices are different, or how their voices are unique, and how their voices are more relevant in understanding the social reality. Okay, because as a group of people who have been dominated over the centuries because of this two double kinds of domination. One is from the caste domination because of their given position as a lower caste Dalit members, and secondly at the receiving end of the patriarchal system. Okay, so they are at the receiving end of two dominating domains. One is that of patriarchy, second one is that of the caste oppression. So because of this double domination or double subjugation, the voice of the Dalit women are of unique importance and significance according to Gopal Guru. So Gopal Guru is a very important, extremely important political scientist. He was a faculty, was a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is currently the editor of Economic and Political Weekly, a very influential, scholarly journal or scholarly weekly published from India. So, the independent and autonomous organization of Dalit women has the potential to counter Dalit patriarchy from and the state-sponsored globalization from without. That is a kind of a basic argument that he puts forward. So, he is talking about the establishment of an independent and autonomous assertion of Dalit women identity found its first expression in the formation of National Federation of Dalit Women, NFDW, at Delhi on August 11, and the remaining part of this essay tries to explain why this initiative is important. And it is not only that Dalit women are assuming a central position in the political scenario, but also because Dalit women's articulations are much more significant in terms of the epistemological and methodological insights that their position is able to provide to in understanding the social reality. The issue of representing Dalit women, both at the level of theory and politics, has erupted time and again in the discourses on Dalit women. Dalit women justify cases of talking differently on the basis of external factors, that is, non-Dalit forces homogenizing the issues of Dalit women, and internal factors, the patriarchal domination within states. So, this particular point we already discussed earlier, because there is always the chance of more mainstream dominant groups hijacking the voices of the more marginalized. Okay, this is a very perennial social phenomenon that you will see in any social movement, in any ideological movements, in any political parties, in any such kind of places where power relations do matter. Okay, the more privileged section, the more visible section, the sections which have a kind of a historical advantage always tend to dominate over others and then silence their views. So Dalit women's voice deserves special attention, mainly because of this fact that the non-Dalit forces homogenizing issues of Dalit women, and secondly because of the internal factors like the patriarchal domination within the Dalits, because Dalits community as such is not exempt from the patriarchal influences. Dalit patriarchy is a reality. So, as I mentioned earlier, Dalit women are at the receiving end of this dual systems of domination. Social locations which determine the perception of reality is a major factor, as we shall see in the context of argument made by Dalit women. The social location which determine the perception of reality. So, this is the point of the standpoint theorist which we are discussing in the coming week as well. Okay, what is your social location vis-a-vis that of your caste, your gender, your class, your ethnicity, and this particular position, the place where you are located. This particular position has a long-lasting and extremely influential influence on your understanding of the reality. Okay, what constitutes reality for you is to a large extent determined by your positionality, which is decided by on the basis of all these factors. Context of arguments made by Dalit women make the representation of Dalit women's issue by non-Dalit women less valid and less authentic. So, Guru is of an opinion that the experiences and stories of Dalit women are being narrated by the non-Dalit women, thereby kind of robbing it of its authenticity. Okay, this is a very important argument. It's a very important argument, very problematic argument. That is the whole beauty of the kind of a discussion and debate between Sundar Sarukhe and Gopal Guru in their very famous book titled The Crack Mirror. So, can we claim an authenticity of our experience because of the fact that we occupy a particular position? And is it impossible for somebody to claim authenticity without really experiencing the kind of life situations that these people have? This is a very important question. We will discuss that in detail. But the claim of Dalit women activists does not mean a celebration of the particular practices of feminism. However, there are feminists who seek to understand the need to talk differently, keeping in mind certain external factors. For example, Gail Omworth. Gail Omworth is a very important scholar. You must have come across Gail Omworth when we discussed Marxian sociology, where she uses Marxian framework to understand caste system in India. Would link the Dalit needs to talk differently vis-a-vis the left forces to the betrayal of the promises given to Dalits by the latter. Rajini Kothari shares the same opinion but rather differently. He says, with the erosion of institutions, the unsettled controversies over public policies, and the growing uncertainty of ideological issues, as well as the decline of democratic functioning of the political forces, faith in the capacity of modern nation state to provide framework for both order and equality has declined. So, Rajini Kothari talks about a failure of the nation state in providing frameworks for equality and order. And to the reliance on the mainstream governmental and party political processes. The result has been the rise of a series of movements as distinct from the earlier gainer of more specific economic movements such as trade union or cooperative movements. Kothari calls this phenomenon the talking differently, a discourse of dissent. Kothari was basically talking about the rise of movements, social movements and political movements in the 80s and early 90s. Yeah, so there are, talking about a series of Dalit movement and women's movement that emerged earlier. You can read that. Yeah, so talking about the different kind of right Sanghasha in Karnataka, they question the populism of these peasant movements who, representing the interest of rich farmers, entered into direct contradiction with the interest of the Dalit agricultural laborers over the issues of minimum wages. So many of these movements that really marked Indian polity during 80s and 90s also had its own contradictions, because many times the kind of interest that they put forward contradicted with the interests of the more poorer sections, including that of Dalit men and Dalit women. Now, secondly, Dalit women would not make common cause with the moral economy advocated by the Shekati Sangatana and its feminist supporters. They are of the opinion that the moral economy of the Sangatana offered no solution to their poverty. Instead, it sought to naturalize their poor living conditions. So these are the kind of how internal contradictions marked many of these social movements. Now, the thirdly, the claim for women's solidarity at both national and global levels subsumes contradictions that exist between high caste and Dalit women. This is a point that is more familiar. The latent manifestations of these contradictions involve subtle forms of caste discrimination as practiced by upper class women against Dalit women in urban areas and resorting to slander of Dalit women in rural areas. Okay, so as we know, the women's experience in general cannot be generalized without paying adequate address to the very stark caste and class differences. Yeah, so a series of examples here which show that women do not speak in a singular voice, and the caste interest or the class interest of women are very, very different. So a series of issues where the upper caste women turned against the lower caste women. Okay, so there you see the solidarity between the women got broken, and more importance was given to the class and then caste affiliation. So giving examples of Shiva Sena women attacking Dalit women in 1998. Then thus beneath the call for women's solidarity, the identity of the Dalit women as Dalit gets whitewashed and allows as non-Dalit women to speak on her behalf. It is against this background that Dalit women have of late protested against their guest appearances in a text or a speech of non-Dalit women and instead organized on their own terms. So he says that this is the reason why these women had decided to form their own organization and then make their own voices heard rather than being represented always by somebody else. And the second one is this another very important. So the first point, as Guru says, is that Dalit women always run the risk of being outnumbered or being marginalized by the more dominant women's group, and that has been the history, that has been the experience. Second point is about Dalit patriarchy. Okay, again the point that we discussed, Dalit women are not free from the patriarchal influences and patriarchal systems of oppression. In the post-Ambedkar period, Dalit leaders have always subordinated and at times suppressed an independent political expression of Dalit women. This political marginalization has been openly condemned by Dalit women at the regional differences of Dalit women and at the Delhi meet. Yeah, so Dalit women have criticized their male counterparts for dominating the literary scene. It is again that is a it is a very interesting point that even among the oppressed group there are different forms of oppressions exist, and there are people like Dalit women who are at the receiving end of these multiple forms of oppressive system. So Dalit women rightly question why they are not considered for the top positions in Dalit literary conferences and institutions. This dissent brings to the fore three things. It is not only caste and class identity but also one's gender positioning that decides the validity of an event. Okay, even now you hear about the story in a similar story in a wide varieties of platforms, whether even if in the organization of some of the so-called most progressive organizations, whether it is liberal organizations or communist organizations or any other organization, the participation of women and the actual representation of women is always a question. Yeah, one's gender positioning that decides the validity of an event. Dalit men reproducing the same mechanism against their women which their high caste adversaries had used to dominate them. Okay, so the mechanisms of domination used by high caste are kind of perpetuated by the Dalit men against their Dalit women. The experience of Dalit women shows that the local resistance within Dalits is important. The experience of Dalit women shows that the local resistance within Dalits is important. The whole situation compels us to defend claim for a Dalit women to talk differently. So, Guru is a very important supporter of the argument that Dalit women do speak differently and they ought to speak differently. Firstly, defended independent assertion of Dalit women should not be viewed by Dalit men as divisive. Instead, it ought to be seen as carrying positive emancipatory potential, because there is always a tendency to criticize this Dalit woman's independent voice as divisive. Okay, because that is the most often used justification that when we are fighting against the upper caste, why are you bringing in the issues of gender? Okay, it will only divert attention or it will only create further divisions within us. So these are the kind of accusations or charges that are mostly leveled against the Dalit women's assertions whenever they talk about their internal problems. Okay, so that issue has to be understood properly. Secondly, the autonomous mobilization of Dalit women can also be understood from an epistemological standpoint. So this is the most important concern and interesting point for us, how Dalit women position provide a kind of a more privileged or more authentic viewpoint about social reality. This perspective maintains that the less powerful members of a society have a more encompassing view of social reality than others because their disadvantaged position grants them a certain epistemic privilege over others. So this is again directly influenced by Sandra Harding's work, where she talks about the kind of a strong objectivity being available to people who are at the receiving end of a social system of stratification and discrimination. Okay, because since they are not part of a dominant ideology, since they are not part of a mainstream society, and since they are part of a most disadvantageous excluded section, Sandra Harding argued that they possess a kind of a more authentic view about society. It has to be noted that though there are some non-Dalit women activists sensitive to the caste dimensions of women's exploitation, their stand has remained ambivalent regarding the critique of caste. Okay, because you would have seen non-upper caste women who sympathize with Dalit women, but their position against the caste remain ambivalent. Dalit women's claim to talk differently assumes certain positions. It assumes that the social location of the speaker will be more or less stable, therefore talking differently can be treated as genuinely representative. This makes the claim of Dalit women to speak on behalf of Dalit women automatically valid. In doing so, the phenomenon of talking differently foregrounds the identity of Dalit women. Now, this can go to certain other extremes, which Gopal Guru cautions about. Dalit women's claim to talk differently assumes certain positions. It assumes that the social location of the speaker will be more or less stable. Therefore, talking differently can be treated as genuinely representative. Okay, you are able to represent a particular group because your position of a Dalit is quite stable. This makes the claim of Dalit women to speak on behalf of Dalit women automatically valid. In doing so, the phenomenon of talking differently foregrounds identity of Dalit women. Though it is difficult at this stage to make any definitive comments on Dalit women's movement, one can question the validity of these above assumptions, because these are slightly problematic assumptions and must be treated with caution. Dalit women from Maharashtra are better educated and employed than their counterparts from Karnataka. So, the moment you tend to treat Dalit women as a homogeneous category who have the authority to talk on behalf of others, then we also will be compelled to look into the internal diversity, internal power structure, internal power dynamics among the Dalit women, and that tells us that the Dalit women do not constitute a singular category. And it would be the former who would represent the Dalit women at Beijing. Thus, here too a certain section of Dalit women will be rendered anonymous. That is why the second point of the agenda of NFDW mentions the need to associate with grassroots Dalit women. So, talking about how that focus on the diversity is something important. Yeah. Also, the Indian state is keen on projecting itself as well-intentioned on gender issues and has sponsored the delegation of Indian women to Beijing. The state, by incorporating women's movement within the jurisdiction of its apparatus, intend to domesticate the movement. Hence, the crucial question which arises with regard to NFDW is whether it will succeed in evading the trap of domestication. So, every social scientist would be extremely wary of or extremely cautious of the state appropriation of any movement. Okay, you know that when the state appropriates, when the state offers support, and then when the state offers kind of protection and then support to any civil society organization, many times it loses its critical edge. Okay, many times it will be domesticated, it will be co-opted by the state, and then its revolutionary potential will be kind of quite compromised in the long run. So, Gopal Guru is kind of conscious about, or he's kind of warning about this kind of a possibility, because this particular visit of this group to Beijing for an international conference is sponsored by government, which he says has to be taken with extreme form of caution. Otherwise, state has the history, state has the legacy of appropriating organizations and domesticating them, making them less revolutionary, making them less lethal, and then critical. So, this is a very short essay. I thought of combining with the essay on essay by Sharmila Rege, and let me just begin that essay so that you will consider it as a continuation. Now, this is the essay, slightly lengthy. It's a special article published in 1998 by Sharmila Rege. Again, a very important sociologist. We have already discussed her essay in the beginning of this particular week, and this is again a very, very important essay. Dalit women talk differently, a critique of difference and towards a Dalit feminist standpoint position. Sharmila Rege, slightly lengthy essay. We will try to complete it in 2 sessions. Maybe I'll take some more time with the class, and then we'll break and then move for the next class. So, let me just begin the essay. A significant shift in the feminist thought of the 1980s and 1990s was the increasing visibility of the black and third world feminist work. Yet, there has been a reluctance on the part of the white feminists to confront the challenges posed to them by black and third world feminism. So, she talks about the international scenario where by 1980s and 90s onwards, there has been a surge of third world and then black feminism, which really challenged the domination of the Western liberal positions. Yeah. So, much of the state of stasis in the Western feminism may be explained in the terms of the alliance between feminism and the post-structuralism, postmodernism, more specifically in terms of the category of difference coming to the center of feminist theorization. A commitment to feminist politics demands that the limited political and analytical use of this category of difference be underlined. So this is a very, very central, tension that that we have discussed in the previous classes. The post-structuralist and post-modernist arguments, and even Gopal Guru's argument all the time talk about the uniqueness of one's own identity and then experience. Okay, what you call as the kind of a difference. So this difference in some of the postmodernist renditions can become endless. Okay, because you are when you say that you need to come together as a women, then you realize that all women are not equal, or all women's experiences are not equal. Their lived experiences are different in terms of gender, caste, race, and other thing. So you talk about black feminism, you talk about the third world feminism, and then again you realize that the third world feminism is not the same. You talk about the Dalit feminism as distinct from the Savarna feminism or the upper caste feminism of India. Then again you realize that the Dalit women again is not a homogeneous category. There are multiple divisions, there are multiple identities, there are hierarchies within that. So you keep on fragmenting to that. You keep on fragmenting, and this story of fragmentation, the story of multiple identities do not have an end at the end. So what happens, this celebration of multiplicities or this celebration of differences, it comes at the cost of a unified political movement. Okay, because every social movement, especially that of the racial and feminist movements, are deeply political movements. They are aimed at engaging in a kind of a political struggle, power struggle with the dominant sections of society. So the ultimately Dalit women, or any women that for that matter, are supposed to have a unified fight against the patriarchal systems and nation state many times. So the moment you go in search of these differences, what happens? The possibility of a unified fight or a unified consolidation and a unified forging a unified alliance and then taking up a kind of a concerted political fight loses its significance and then edge. So this whole question of the feminist political demands and the category of differences are always kind of in a tension. So in the Indian context, the political pitfalls of the ever increasing impact of postmodernist and post-structuralist approaches in terms of the rise of cultural-logical and communitarian approaches, the rise of the late subaltern subject Sumit Sarkar, and the post-colonial subject have been noted. So these are some of the important transitions during this particular time. In the framework of post-Orientalism studies, the focus remains on colonial domination alone, thereby the pre-colonial roots of caste, gender and class dominations come to be ignored. She's talking about how there are different stages. Yeah. Recent feminist scholarship, in adopting the Sadian framework, not only falls into the above mentioned traps, but ends up with a frame that completely overlooks the contributions of the interventions of women in the non-Brahmin movement. The invisibility of this lineage has led scholars to conceive the recent autonomous assertion of Dalit women as a different voice, and she's referring to scholars like Guru and others. The 1980s were marked by the newly exploding caste identity and consciousness and theoretical and political issues involved in the debate on caste and its role in social transformation. The early 1990s saw the assertion of the autonomous Dalit women's organization at both regional and national level. Such an assertion had thrown up several crucial theoretical and political challenges, besides underlining the Brahmanism of the feminist movement and the patriarchal practices of Dalit politics. However, the debates seem to have come to rest, and the relative silence and the apparent absence of a revisioning of feminist politics thereafter only suggest an ideological position of multiple plural feminist standpoints. That is to say, the separate assertion of Dalit women's organization come to be accepted as one more standpoint, and within such a framework of difference, issues of caste becomes sole responsibility of the Dalit women's organization. So her argument is that though from 1980s the Dalit women are seen as yet another category, that is simply been simply merely acknowledged as yet another standpoint. Okay, yet another standpoint, and by practice it is evident that it is only the Dalit women who actually talk about caste as a major issue to be confronted. a host of other mainstream women's organizations, liberal women's organizations, or the left women's organizations do not identify or do not deal with a caste as the way it should have been done. Yeah, so this paper, this section is about how this paper is organized. We will discuss that in the coming class. Yeah, so this section we will discuss in the coming class. We intend to complete this essay in the next class, and will continue after this break. Thank you.